Welcome to the Blue Moon Bookstore and Vinyl Emporium. Thank you very, very much for having us. This is just a really important event or special event. My name is Lois Ann Abraham. I teach creative writing and other things at American River College, as many of you know. And I'm here to read you a little bit out of my novel, Tina Goes to Heaven. And we also have Ian Wilson and Inara Gard, and we have some people from my creative writing class who signed up for a little open mic time. So I'm not going to give you a lot of background on anything. Hey, you know, that's how I'm feeling. So this, well, I actually am. This is a novel about a sex worker who does not want to be a sex worker anymore because she's losing her kind of position as the pimp's girlfriend and he's mad at her, so he's going to make her work the streets, and she knows it's brutal. She knows it's a brutal life. So she has robbed a bank and run away. Because how are you going to make money? You can never make enough money being a prostitute. So now and she's going into this Happy Trout fishing resort, Happy Trout Fishing Resort, which is really the setting for most of the story. That's where she ends up when she tries to escape. She ends up with no money and no ID and nothing. So she walks into, and this is just the first time that she is there. They're trying to camp with her sidekick, Brad, who is a doofus. Let's see. So she's run out of money. She's going to try to go in there and sell one last blowjob just to make enough money to pay for their dinner. And so she doesn't want to do that anymore, but you know, they have no money because Brad spent it all on camping supplies. Okay, she went up the steps. Well, let me start earlier. Tina gave him the high five because he's always going, high five, Brad and Tina. And she gave him the high five. And then tried to shake herself up, to take on electricity, to assume the muscle alertness that says, look at this. I'm the goods. How about it, big boy? I am the answer to your wettest dreams. She went up the steps, swung open the screen door, and set foot inside the Happy Trout Fishing Resort for the first time. She heard the bright little bell on the door, but she didn't feel her fate closing in around her like a fist. And yet close it did, with a click more felt than heard if she had been paying attention. Everything she had done, been, thought, felt, imagined, wanted, avoided, believed, denied, and lied about, funneled into this moment, this step. She could have backed out, but it would have been film rewinding, life unhappening, the butterfly climbing back into the cocoon and pulling it shut. And she was intent on solving the problem she perceived, unaware of the questions that needed answering. Who is this woman? What is she for? Okay, so she goes in. I'm going to give you her first encounter with Bill, that she's going to try to sell her services to. What can I do for you, ma'am? He asked. Ma'am was not a great beginning. Even miss would have been more encouraging. Tina ran her tongue over her lips and looked deep into his brown eyes, where she could see by her reflection that she should have maybe done something with her hair. Maybe it's a question of what I can do for you, baby, she said. Maybe too much too soon, but you have to start somewhere. He took a step back, puzzled. What exactly do you mean? What are you selling? Because I'm not likely to buy anything. You should know that. No need for you to waste your time. What's your name? Bill pointed to his name tag. Well, Bill, I'm not really worried about wasting my time. I have all the time in the world for a man like you. Tina looked him up and down and licked her lips again. She hoped this would be quick. She was starving. He looked relatively young and healthy enough not to take forever like older guys sometimes did. Here's how it is, Bill. My boyfriend and I are running a little short of money and food, and I'm willing to do... Tina breathed in and out, letting the breath move her body toward him as planned. Almost anything to make a little cash and have a little fun on the side. You look like a man who likes a good time. How about I take you back behind the kitchen there and give you a thrill? $50 and the blowjob of a lifetime. What do you say, Billy boy? She thought he was hooked. He put his elbows on the counter and leaned forward until his face was only inches from hers. It was a nice face, but kind of sad, or maybe just cranky. His breath smelled like oranges, and he was so close that each word he spoke arrived in a citrus puff. She tried not to flinch and break her act. You are not welcome at this establishment. Do you understand? This isn't a house of prostitution. This is not Nevada. His voice was quiet and confidential. This is a family resort, and if you aren't off the property in 10 minutes, I'm going to call the sheriff and have you and your scrawny boyfriend removed. If I see you so much as smile at one of my customers, I swear I will remove you myself. You take yourselves down the road and across the bridge and turn whichever way you want. You are never, never to come back here. Do we understand each other? You can't do that. You can't throw us out. We got a campsite. We're customers. Tina didn't even try this sidelong, are you sure? Look that sometimes retrieved reluctant Johns who were trying to pull away. The whole thing had gone seriously wrong. Actually, I can do that. Read the sign. And he gestured to the side towards the cash register. What do you mean? I have shoes and shirt. His face became even more serious. The other sign. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. That's you. I am refusing you service and kicking your sorry self out. You used the door on the way in, so you know where it is. Now go. Thank you. So we're having a little open mic thing here in the middle, and I believe that Paul and Daniel and Barbara are going to do that. So I'm going to sit down. I will introduce that they're my students. This is Barbara, Katie, Paul Summerfield. I knew that. I didn't know that, actually. It would have taken me a while. And Daniel Babella. I always want to say Bubala because I think it's more fun, but okay, Babella. So since you're first on the list, Daniel, why don't you come read us, I believe, a poem? Okay. Try to look.
Hello. All right. So I want to read a few of my poems. No, they're pretty short, but they're fun. So yeah, most of my poetry has to do with love because I love love. Especially when I have this like feeling like towards like a girl. Make this little, yeah, and like I don't want to be like a creep or something and just like talk to her right away or so I don't know. So I just write, whatever I feel. So my first poem is called Windows, and if you guys know, the eyes are sometimes considered the windows to the soul. So this poem is a little bit about that. So your eyes call to mine, a beauty oh so fine. The mysteries hidden and revealed, in the colored iris concealed. By the river curve of hair, this beauty none can compare. Perfect timing. That was the end of the poem. They're short, like I said. I have long ones, but they're really long. They're like epics, so I don't want to read those to you guys here. I only have 5 minutes, right? 4 minutes. Oh, wow, that minute. Time is quick. Okay. The next poem is another love poem. It's called The Gaze of the Moon. So I really, here in California, here especially in Sacramento, Northern California, we get to enjoy nice, beautiful summer nights. And sometimes I'll go for a skate, or go for a walk. And I just always love the image of the moon, and just like when it rises to its peak, and right when it's even hits the horizon, you know how like huge, just monstrous red, and then it reaches like its peak, and it's just this beautiful thing. And so I just was like, oh, I'm gonna write about, just had this idea about the moon. The gaze of the moon. I noticed that gaze you gave me, a look of affection. You knew what I was thinking, but I knew what you were too. You froze from your cold stare, mesmerized by what I had left in my eyes for you to see, to lead you to a place of just you and me. And after I wrote this poem, I realized, I was like, the moon reflects the sun. And if, like, the speaker or the narrator of the poem is the sun, he reflects something in his eyes to leave for her to see. So it's like super interesting. And then in her eyes, there's a reflection of that affection from the male, or from me, or not me, yeah, from me. That was good. All right. So I wrote after, I was like, oh, that's deep. Like when I die, and this is like famous posthumously, and when they study this in colleges and literature, they'll be able to go deep into that kind of interpretation. This next one is The Clouds That Smile. So this is a nature one. I love clouds. I work outside a lot, so I see clouds a lot. So I just wrote this one thing in clouds. The clouds that smile. Let me tell you of the clouds that smile. A strange sight indeed, like the upward flow of the Nile, that when the clouds smile, the sky below bleeds. And I had this privilege of, do I wait for it to sink in? Like, it's my first time doing a reading in this kind of manner. Anyways, so I love that poem because it's simple, but just the image in my head will never leave. I went skydiving in Santa Cruz, and there's this it's right by the ocean. They used to land right onto the beach, but they stopped doing that because the neighbors would complain about the screaming, and so right, and they literally the season before that, like that's when they that season that I went, it was like they did not let us land on the beach, so that was the first time we had to go into the field. So anyway, so we fall out of the sky like 12,000 feet, and we're just like flowing. And that day was kind of like cloudy and gloomy, and so the plane went above the clouds, and so there's this ocean of clouds, right? And then once you get past the clouds, there's the ocean itself. So it's like this this beauty of just this dichotomy of light and dark, this like this whole new world up here, and then this world down here. And like for the clouds, they smile above the horizon, but under the horizon it bleeds, it's raining, so it was pretty fun. All right, this last poem I wrote by accident. So I was in a group message, and we were just debating some theological truths in this group message. It just came out of nowhere, this question, and then we started writing in poetry, like we responded to each other in poems, and then I ended up just saving this poem because it was so good. At least I think it was good, so that's all that matters. So it's called Something Peculiar. Love eternal, 'tis the love birth from internal. The world despises the heart and strives for the dark, cares only for appearance, but God desires resemblance from the inside out. How great thou art that you shall put a new fount in me, and now clearly I see. And this fount I mention is only to grasp your attention, a form of speech that I may teach. Love is from God, and God is true love. It begins inside and ends where it finds. While Satan rules the air, this love is not familiar. Hence, what we can give to this world is truly quite peculiar. And now, in my poetry.
I = 0. Do. In the storm, I am the rock that doesn't move. In the deafening sound, I am the glass wall that doesn't crack. In the profane, vulgar trash heap of rotting words, I'm the thug OG. In the verbal tirade, onion shrink ray that dilates people to 2.54 centimeters tall, I am the Colossus. On any given day, my love spreads infinitely out into space in n dimensions, surrounding your point. No matter how hard you scratch at my anodized, heat-treated carborundum coating, I don't feel a thing. Until N-Brain 42721 crosses our path, and I see us for what we are. I am the wet sand that shifts under your feet. I am the baby that cries after a loud clap. You are nails across a chalkboard. Surely I am the salted slug that you slowly squash. And I do feel those scratches, scratch upon scar, and my love for you does end until I say goodbye. Loop until I plus plus is greater than 3. Then the blackness falls away as my love collapses around the singularity that is me, and I awaken to a bright new day. Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for listening. It's a short story that I've entitled Teeth. Andrea didn't want to live in that apartment with the garbage smell that seeped through every crack in the old walls. It reminded her of the old falling down shack near that stinky riverbank where her grandmother had lived. In fact, the smell in her apartment went beyond the garbage odor. She thought about the cigarette butt she'd found stuck in the puffed wheat cereal box at that old shack. When she'd visit for a summer, she noticed that Grandma was getting more senile each year. But Andrea never mentioned the peculiarities because her mom reminded her that one day Andrea might get old too. Now as Andrea reflected back on those summers, she remembered the time her grandmother shuffled out of the bathroom with a strip of toilet paper stuck to the bottom of her slipper. Other things Grandma did seemed really funny when she'd tell her friends back at school about how Grandma would forget to put her teeth in before she'd bite into an ear of corn. Oh, how funny that had been, in retrospect. But that was 60 years ago, and the smells and the memories were as clear as if she'd visited Grandma last week. Well, she smiled to herself. Now all of her school friends were gone, moved away or dead. Better to forget the past for the moment and remember to put her new teeth in before her granddaughter arrived for the summer. Thank you.
Hi, all. Those of you who are way over in the corner and can't see but only hear, maybe you want to scoot over or something. You're welcome to rearrange your chair so that you can get the visuals. Next up, we're going to have Ian Wilson. Ian and I are writing partners and have been for a few years now. And I take great delight in his lighthearted supernatural mysteries that he's been writing. And I'll steal his thunder by saying that he has an agent who's searching for a publisher for his works right now, which I think is very thrilling. And hope that you'll give him a warm welcome. Here's Ian.
This is part of my in-progress second novel. The first one is the one that's being shopped around by an agent right now. This one's called The Phosphorescent Terrier, and in it, Gabrielle and her husband, who are homeowners up in Nevada City, have a ghost of their neighbor's terrier that's tearing up their backyard. They also have some food stolen by a colony of gnomes who live in the backyard, so they're hoping, Trevor anyway, is hoping to get rid of them. In this section, the couple have called in the famous medium, Madame Griselda, and her factotum Waters to deal with the problems. Chapter 22, Medium on a Misty Night. Madame Griselda arrived at precisely 6 p.m. on a sodden Thursday and poured out of the driver's side door of a utility truck, not a sport utility vehicle, rather the type of truck used by companies like Pacific Gas and Electric, with toolboxes built into the sides and a large coil of cable wrapped around a big spool mounted to the bed. A flashing orange light cut through the mist like a lighthouse beacon. The truck was deep violet, with the words written on the doors in big gold letters, Madame Griselda Incorporated, Psychic and Mediumistic Services. So much for her much-vaunted discretion. Madame Griselda was, if anything, even more enormous than Trevor remembered her from their encounter in Elk, although the same clothes evidently still fit her. A signal orange parka over a loose blouse of some shimmery blue material, voluminous black trousers, and ebony flats. Her white hair was cut to a medium natural style, and her wrinkled dark chocolate face carried an expression of academic curiosity, as though their house were presenting her with a new topic for a monograph. She was taller than Trevor, and virtually towered over Gabrielle. Despite her height and girth, she walked in a curious floating gait, almost levitating over the ground. Her only adornment was a string of large artificial pearls, no turban with an ostrich feather sticking out. Trevor wasn't sure if he was getting his money's worth. She might at least have dressed the part. Waters, in Burberry and bowler, slid gently from the passenger side seat and landed silently on the ground. He stood by the truck, impassively awaiting instructions. He didn't even lean against the fender. His posture was as ramrod straight as a military color guard. Trevor asked if he wanted to come into the house. "Thank you, sir. No. I shall wait with the equipment until Madam has decided on a course of action." Trevor nodded and hurried into the hallway just in time to catch Madame Griselda saying, "Yes, this house has a very strong spiritual footprint." "That's what I keep telling my husband," Gabrielle said. "He never believes me." "Ah, a skeptic." The medium turned and looked down at Trevor, studying his face. Trevor imagined he was being judged as a gatecrasher to the party. "You have much to learn, sir. Now to business. Waters informs me you have a ghost." "A ghost dog," Gabrielle explained. "The ghost of the neighbor's terrier that was killed in a car accident." "We're not sure it's a ghost," Trevor interrupted. "It may be a real dog." "Honey, it glows. Sort of greenish. Here's the photo we took of it." Gabrielle handed Madame Griselda a printout from the camera. "The picture is not very clear, but you can get an idea of the size and shape." "Yes," the medium said, perusing the photograph. "It does appear to be supernatural. However, we must have further information to decide how best to effect the phantom's removal." "I saved this," Gabrielle said, handing over the plastic bag in which she had stored the dog poop. "Ah," Madame Griselda said, looking inside. "Spore of the undead." She sniffed. "And most odoriferous. I can have this analyzed, but the tests will cost extra." "I don't think we need to go to that trouble," Trevor said hastily. "Let's take a look at the backyard." Madame Griselda placed the bag on the hall table and followed Gabrielle onto the back porch. Trevor limped after them. The medium surveyed the damage. "The spirit has been most active." She led the couple down the steps and walked along the path, looking into the holes and piles of earth on both sides. "Show me where you saw it the other night." Gabrielle pointed to the ferns around the koi pond. "Right here." "Indeed." She stood for a minute among the ferns, inhaling the moist evening air in deep breaths. "I sense a strong psychic presence in this place." "What can we do about it?" Gabrielle asked. "We can dispel it. A sitting will be necessary. I charge $400 in these cases." "You've got to be kidding me," Trevor said. "Shh, honey," Gabrielle said. "We're a little short on funds, Madame Griselda. Because you are new customers, I will give you a $200 discount." Trevor suppressed a pang of annoyance. He wasn't sure whether it was toward Madame Griselda, who he was sure was out to fleece them for every dime she could get, or toward Gabrielle, who seemed to be willing to hand over all their money. "I suppose we could manage it," he finally said, "if it will really work." "It's worth a try," Gabrielle said. "We need to do something." "I think calling animal control might be a good idea," Trevor responded, "and a lot less expensive." "It's a ghost. What do you think a dog catcher is going to do? Scoop it up in a net?" "All right, but show her the mud puddle first." "That's right, Madame Griselda. We have another problem." "Indeed. This residence must be more active than I first suspected." Gabrielle led the way to the ring of caution tape she had set up around the mud puddle. "This hole sucks in everything you put in it. The gnomes said it was magic." Madame Griselda raised her eyebrows. "Gnomes, you say? Have you had contact with them?" "We helped one of them with some food. Apparently something dug into their storeroom and their food supply was destroyed." "Interesting. Gnome removal is most problematic, but I have had some experience in the area. We don't want them removed. They're friendly. That is what many people think. Gnomes are most variable in their temperaments. I once assisted in the removal of a colony of field gnomes on an artichoke farm in Watsonville. They were transforming the agricultural workers into snowshoe hares. "I find that hard to believe," Trevor said. "The evidence was irrefutable. I was successful in removing the gnomes. Unfortunately, the workers were lost. To this day, there are a large number of snowshoe hares in Watsonville." "Right." Trevor had been to Watsonville on a number of occasions and had never seen a snowshoe hare. He was beginning to think he was going to have to resign himself to a sense of being wound up until this ghost-busting charade was over. "How do we get rid of them?" Trevor asked. Though he didn't imagine he and Gabrielle were in imminent danger of being turned into rabbits, a chance of removing the larder thieves was tempting. "The preferred way is to find the entrance to their burrow and light a fire of cleansing herbs to smoke them out," the medium said. "Ferrets are also an effective means." "That's horrible," Gabrielle cried. "These are garden gnomes, and they haven't shown any signs of hostility. In fact, they were the ones who warned us about the mud puddle. Garden gnomes tend to have more even characters, but you must be on your guard nonetheless." "So what do you think about the mud puddle?" Trevor asked. Approaching the edge, he studied the rings forming on the surface where the droplets of rain splashed into the pool. She towed the water near the edge. "Be careful," Gabrielle warned. Suddenly, Madame Griselda's shoe was ripped from her foot and sucked into the puddle. Waves, thick with silt, slopped over the spot of its disappearance. "My stars!" the medium exclaimed, backing away. She examined her left foot, possibly to see if all the toes were still there. "Most hazardous." "Are you all right?" Gabrielle asked. "Except for the loss of a rather expensive Gucci loafer, I am unharmed." Fearing that she might decide to add the cost of a new pair of shoes to the rapidly escalating bill, Trevor changed the subject. "Can we fill it in somehow?" "We must get a reading of its depth and structure first," she said. "How do we do that?" Gabrielle asked. "I have just the equipment." Following Madame Griselda back to her truck, they watched as she unlocked a panel on the side and fished around among a large mass of tangled wires and electronic devices. Finally, she extracted a rectangular box with an LCD screen and some buttons on it. Attached to this by a long cable was a black metal cylinder. "What's that?" Trevor asked. "An APL device. Should give us a precise readout of the dimensions of the puddle." Trevor cast his mind back to a long-ago conversation with Waters. APL, Aquatic Phenomenon Locator, a type of sonar device, right? The medium nodded. "I found it most useful when I was asked to verify reports of a creature living in one of the lakes in the Sierras." "Did you find anything?" Gabrielle asked excitedly. "The results were inconclusive, as they often are in such cases. I took several readings of a large, slow-moving object, but it could have been a fish of great size. Nonetheless, I warned the local residents to be careful when they fish or swim in the lake. They now take considerable pride in announcing to visitors that they have a monster in their lake. I believe they do a large trade in T-shirts." Trevor shook his head, unsure just how tall this tale was. "So how does it work?" "We first submerge the transducer in the puddle." She held up the cylinder. Then it will give us a picture of the monitor on the monitor of the sides and bottom, as well as any unusual features that may lurk in its depths." "How do we keep the sonar device from getting sucked into the puddle?" "I observed that you have a large apple tree nearby. Waters will strap the monitor to its trunk before we throw in the transducer." She rummaged around in the compartment and removed 2 wide nylon bands. The quartet marched back down the side of the house into the garden. Waters spent a few minutes clipping the straps to rings on the monitor and passing them around the gnarled trunk of the tree. Testing them for tightness, he nodded and approached the puddle, paying out the transducer's cable behind him. He tossed the cylinder into the middle of the pool, where it disappeared with a whoosh, immediately drawing the cable taut and causing the tree to groan and assume a noticeable tilt. If he seemed impressed by this, he gave no sign of it and returned calmly to the group. "A most interesting phenomenon," Madame Griselda said. "I have never encountered anything quite like it." She pressed a button next to the LCD screen and the monitor came on. Gabrielle and Trevor took up positions on either side of her. Waters held back. He could either have been paying attention or admiring the scenery. It was hard to tell from his expression. The monitor was marked off in a green grid, with small numbers along the edges. Under the grid was a color diagram, a profile of the whole. "It is approximately 5 feet across," Madame Griselda said, "descending in a rough cylinder for about 6 feet, and then widening out into a larger chamber, another 7 feet deep. The bottom is uneven, and there would appear to be a large amount of debris scattered across it. What do you make of it? Gabrielle asked. I would suggest that your two problems are related. The dog seems to have dug a hole that was filled by the rain. The weight of the water appears to have caused a subsidence into a larger chamber below it. You mean there was a cavern underneath the hole? Trevor asked. Precisely. I believe the cavern in question was probably the gnome's storeroom. Would explain the magical nature of the hole. That's amazing, Gabrielle exclaimed. You made that deduction just from looking at the sonar? Indeed, she said, with a very slight hint of smugness. One must be a bit of a detective in my line of work. So what do we do about it? Trevor asked. A load of sand bearing crystals of a magical disposition should solve the problem, she said, rubbing her chin. I know a source near Boron in the Mojave Desert. The sand is quite expensive, at $37 per cubic yard, and you would need, let me see, approximately 40 cubic yards. $1,480 plus transportation costs and labor of about $500, roughly $2,000. We don't have $2,000, Trevor said. Isn't there some cheaper way of fixing it? How about regular sand? Because of the magical nature of the water, regular sand would probably cause a mire rather than fill it. A sort of quicksand, if you will. No, it would be more prudent to purchase the charmed sand. Nevertheless, if you cannot afford it, you could wait until the water dries out in the summer and fill the hole with topsoil. If you plant holly bushes in the soil, the benign influence of the plants should prevent it from subsiding when the rains come. A thoughtful expression came over her face, and she concluded, will also look quite decorative at Christmas time. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce my good friend Inara with a chapter from her latest venture here. And I think she'll give you more details.
Thank you all for coming. Those of you who are in Lois Ann's creative writing class have already read some of the stories in my collection of short stories, Remedies for Hunger. Commercial aside, copies of that book, as well as Lois Ann Abraham's two books, are in the back room on the same table as the cookies. So my novel is called A Complete Unknown, and it's set in Chicago in 1970. Robert is a doctor near retirement age who's pretty burned out and lonely, widowed, and a young woman, a teenager really, comes to see him for a pregnancy test. She calls herself Kathy, and she never comes back for the results of her test. This concerns him, and he sets out into the streets of Chicago in search of her. And at this point in the novel, he hasn't found her, but he has befriended a young hippie named Red. Red has called him up very early one Sunday morning and told him to meet him on a street corner downtown near the river and bring some money, and that's all he says. Every chapter is titled with a phrase from a song that will be familiar to those of us from a certain vintage, and this one is called If You Go Chasing Rabbits. Doc! Red peered from a shaded entranceway. Cigarette butts littered the sidewalk around his feet. He smelled as if he hadn't showered in a couple of days. Robert tried to get a look at the young man's pupils to see if they were pinpricks or had dilated into black saucers, but his hair hung in the way. You ready? Without waiting, he hefted a knapsack onto his shoulder and darted from the doorway to a nearby railing. A stairway led into the shadows, and he plunged down the steps. Robert had to follow into a humid, pungent darkness where he stood, blinking. This was no subway station, but an intersection of narrow sidewalks leading into a labyrinth of dim alleys. The streets still bore a faint grid of cobblestones on their surface. Granite curbs, almost a foot high, rose steeply beside them, and soggy brown paper bags reeked in the gutter. Hey man, keep up! Red paused 10 feet ahead of him, impatient to get going. What is this place? Robert's voice stalled as if the dank air were too thick to carry sound. His hand still held the railing, reluctant to let go of the cool metal that connected him to the upper sidewalk. He craned his neck to peer up the stairs, catching a glimpse of pale shins scissoring past. Lower Wacker Drive. You've never been down here? Robert knew that delivery trucks used some network of streets beneath the skyscrapers and avenues of downtown. But the underground was a piece of Chicago lore that was half myth, like Mrs. O'Leary's cow. Or so he had thought. Red moved back toward him. I heard that a tribe lives down here with some girls. They're kind of strange, so stick close and do as I say. Robert nodded and released the railing. Rusted signs hung from the blackened ceiling, giving clues as to what stood above: LaSalle Street, State Street, Randolph. The throb and rumble of a bus overhead shook the few streetlights that cast their pallid glow. The further they walked, the thicker and more humid the air became. Without speaking, they moved closer together. South, west, south again. Red seemed to be navigating by memory. The intersections were lit so weakly that Robert couldn't make out what the letters spelled now. He strained to hold the street grid in his mind as he followed through underground streets lined with battered, padlocked doors that must lead into the basements of unseen towers. His ankles ached from negotiating the uneven cobblestones. Something about the walls troubled him, so black, so blank. And then he had it. There was no graffiti. These abandoned streets were shunned even by the gangs. There'd be no point in the Blackstone Rangers or Mighty D's bringing their spray cans to leave their lurid marks, for who would see them? Red? Robert's voice scratched his raw throat. The young man didn't answer, but he slowed his pace and inclined his head to show he was listening. His curls were limp with sweat. Let's stop a moment. They paused at another grimy corner. There was no place to sit, no spot to lean. The shadows pressed upon them. The last stairway leading out had been many turns ago. Who lives down here, and how could they? Red shrugged. Some people want to go underground. He pulled a box of Marlboros from his shirt pocket. His lighter clicked and flared. Maybe they dig the scene. Maybe they think it's safer than living up above. He spoke nonchalantly, but his face looked grave, his eyes dark hollows. A rat squealed nearby, and Red twitched like a skittish horse. This isn't safe, Robert protested, wiping his face with a handkerchief. Disease, vermin, rat bites, bad air. Red smoked in silence, not disagreeing. Let us descend into the blind world. Robert had read Dante's Inferno in the company of other young lads, sporting pink cheeks and small frowns as they puzzled over the text in a sunlit classroom. How could they have understood what it meant? And nor had he, until now. Red flicked his half-smoked butt into the gutter and pulled at the straps of his knapsack to ease his shoulders. We're almost there. Let's go. Robert recited, Now, therefore, rise, control your breath, and call upon the strength of soul that wins all battles. There is a longer ladder yet to climb. This much is not enough. His voice gave out a little on the last word. He folded his damp handkerchief back into his pocket. Wow! Red shook his head, grinning for the first time. Come on, then, let's go climb some ladders. They left the safety of the single streetlight, plodding onward, close together in the clammy dark. After a few minutes, Red pointed silently to the right, indicating a narrow corridor. They entered tentatively, trying to muffle the sound of their footsteps, their elbows occasionally bumping. Robert could barely see ahead. He began to imagine an open manhole, a yawning pit of some kind that would appear before them without warning. His legs faltered. When Red grabbed the back of his shirt, Robert halted instantly, feeling as if he were teetering on a brink. "Keep quiet." Red's breath was hot against his ear. Then his voice rang out, "Joshua!" The echo bounced back, a thinner version, less confident. A weak light flickered ahead of them as if someone waved a signal. "Okay, we're good to go." Red kept his hand on Robert's back as they stepped forward. Perhaps to keep the doctor from fleeing, perhaps to steady himself. At the end of the passage, they angled left and emerged into a space lit by a Coleman lamp that cast long shadows up the walls. 4 or 5 ragged people stood in its glow, empty crates arranged behind them as if they'd been seated in a circle. Lit from below, their faces were elongated and ghoulish, like children holding flashlights beneath their chins in summer tents, making their eyes haunted and their mouths gashes. As Robert's vision adapted to the gloom, he saw a dozen women and girls huddled deeper in the passage. "Who enters?" The voice, nasal, almost whining, came from the lone figure still seated beside the lantern. He unfolded himself to his full height then, looming over them, easily 6.5 feet tall. His untamed hair might brush against the black ceiling. "Friends, Joshua." Red didn't bow his head, but his tone was deferential, as if asking a crocodile for permission to cross the river. "We come with offerings." He prodded Robert, who looked at him blankly. "Give him the dough." "Oh, right." Robert pulled a handful of small bills out of his pants pocket and stepped forward. "Stop!" Joshua snapped. 2 of his smaller companions leapt in front of him, eyes locked on Robert and Red, waiting for a command. Joshua towered above them, his face wild with a kind of fury. "Do not approach, Joshua! Your presence is not clean, old man." Robert looked about the dank chamber, bewildered at what could possibly be considered clean or unclean here. Red took the bills from his inert fingers and offered them to the nearest person, a bedraggled woman of indeterminate age. She peered at the pieces of paper as if she did not recognize them, examining each side like a curio. Then she passed them one by one to the guards, who handed them silently to their leader. Joshua glanced at the money before secreting it in the folds of his dirty robes. "What do you seek, old man? Joshua will grant you one wish." If Robert had been above ground, not lost in a dark labyrinth, he might have laughed. But he answered cautiously, unsure whether he should regard this as an elaborate theatrical production or madness. "I seek a girl. She..." "Joshua's women are not for sale. They follow the true path now. Your tainted money cannot pluck them from the hand that holds them." The women in the background shifted, gathering together into a tighter clump. Red spoke up. "Hey, man, it's cool. We only want to know if she's with you. No hassles." "If she is with Joshua, she will not leave. If she is here, there is no other place to be. The serpent is eating its tail. The light drains from the world of darkness. Soon the new world will be born." He nodded and beat with his words, and the heads of the others huddled around the lantern did the same. While Joshua intoned, Robert eyed the followers. Did any of the girls have that mark beneath the dirt on her chin? A certain angle to her shoulders, the distended belly that she must surely have by now. "The phoenix will rise from the ashes of Gomorrah. It will bear Joshua and all who follow him to heaven, with Buddha and Jesus and Mohammed. In heaven will be the lizard king." None of the girls looked delicate enough or familiar. They clung to one another, peeping at him and Red as if they were spacemen landed on a distant, dark moon. "She's not here," he remarked to Red, although he couldn't be completely certain. But the thought that she might have become one of these trapped mole people was too much to bear. It had to be impossible. "Let's go." Joshua shoved his guards aside and lunged toward them. "You cannot speak," he owled. Robert stumbled back, banging into something hard and jagged. "You dare interrupt while Joshua is speaking the word?" "Oh, shit," muttered Red. "Move it! Go!" He pushed Robert toward the entrance. The room rang with howls. Joshua's voice, higher than all of them, indignant and insistent. "The serpent is eating its tail! The light drains from the world of darkness!" They staggered through the corridor, feeling the fulfillment of Joshua's prophecy as they rounded the corner, out of the lantern-lit chamber and back into the gloom. A stone struck Robert's neck. 2 or 3 more smacked against the unseen walls around them. Red shoved something into his hands. "Here." Robert flicked the lighter once, twice, before it caught. Behind them, Joshua's clan crowded into the passageway, their hands heavy with bricks and rocks. Red yanked his knapsack from his shoulders and tore open the top. Holding onto one strap, he flung the pack into the air, and dozens of brilliant oranges flew out and tumbled to the ground, rolling and bumping against the walls. 2 girls fell to their knees on the filthy floor and grabbed at the oranges as if they were made of gold. Then, with one savage cry, the whole crowd scrambled after the fruit. "Go, go, go!" Red was already jogging, holding Robert's arm so that the lighter could shed some small illumination for them both. The scrabbling noises behind them faded as they broke free and emerged back into the dim and nameless street, where Red released him and began to slam his body against the walls, cursing as he careened from side to side. "What the hell are you doing?" Robert still held the lighter, its little flame hissing and sputtering. His leg throbbed, and his arms stung where they had scraped against the bricks. His hat was lost somewhere in the sooty maze. "Looking," Red grunted as he banged his shoulder into another spot, "for a way out. There aren't, damn it, any stairs near here. Ha!" The wall sprang open with a metallic clang as an unmarked door yielded to his force. Robert limped in, and Red slammed the door shut behind them. They stood for a moment, panting. "What was all that with the oranges?" "Backup plan," Red spoke with pride. "I figured fruit might distract those wackos if things got hairy." "Good thinking. Do you know where we are now?" "Basement of some building." Red took the lighter and waved it around until he spotted a freight elevator. They yanked open the doors and staggered inside. A minute later, they burst through a fire door and out into an alley. Robert squinted at his watch. 10:15. He felt giddy with relief, dizzy with sunshine. Shit, lost my smokes. Red's curls were plastered to his head, his shirt and hands smeared with dirt. "You look like hell, my friend." "Same to you, old man." Robert looked down. Brown slime coated his shoes. Spots of blood stained one pant leg, and his arms were streaked with dirt. He hobbled to the end of the alley and looked around. "Well, at least I know where we are," he said with satisfaction. "Follow me." Thank you.